Welcome into my NFC East division preview. I have this as the fourth best division in the NFL and best in the NFC. This should be a very competitive division, and the NFC is wide open, so I expect all four of these teams to be playing meaningful football at the end of the year. My top-ranked team in the NFC East is the Philadelphia Eagles, who come in as my second team overall. Their biggest strength is the offensive line, which ranks first in the NFL. Lane Johnson and Jordan Mailata is an elite tackle duo. Jason Kelce is a top 2 center along with Creed Humphrey. Landon Dickerson at left guard had a great second year, especially as a run blocker. I'd probably have him as a top 10 to 15 guard heading into next season. And then the one question for this O-line is right guard, but they have options. Tyler Steen, who they took in the 3rd round, is listed as the starter, and I liked Steen as a developmental prospect, but I didn't really think he was ready to play day one. I'd like to see Cam Jurgens win this job. The Eagles took him in the 2nd round in 2022 to be the long-term replacement for Jason Kelce. I think after a redshirt year, he should be a better option than Steen. You want him to get some starting experience before you give him the center job down the line, and selfishly, I want to see some Cam Jurgens, Jason Kelce combo blocks. Jurgens is probably the closest thing we've seen to Kelce as a prospect in terms of movement skills as a run blocker, but regardless of what they do at right guard, this should be one of, if not the best offensive line in the league. The two position groups on this roster that I don't feel great about are linebacker and safety, but I went with linebacker as the biggest weakness. You've got Nicholas Morrow, who's a replacement level starter coming over from Chicago, and it's incredible how often teams sign players in free agency who had good games against them the year before. Nicholas Morrow and DeAndre Swift had probably their best games of the year against Philly. And then Nakobe Dean, 3rd round pick last year, is set to be the other starter. I think this was a good value pick, but there's still some questions about what his run defense is going to look like in the NFL. He's very small for a linebacker, and he doesn't have great play recognition to offset that, so he gets stuck to blocks pretty easily at the 2nd level. I think he'll be good in coverage, but he needs to speed up that reaction time and develop ways of avoiding or getting around blocks. And then there's pretty much no proven depth. The backups are Sean Bradley and Christian Ellis, who have 192 combined career snaps, so this is the weakest part of the roster, but teams like Philadelphia with elite defensive lines can get by with mediocre linebacker play, at least when it comes to run defense, because if your D tackles are eating up double teams and preventing blockers from climbing to the 2nd level, the linebackers are going to be kept clean and have more opportunities to make plays in the backfield. So it's my lowest rated position group, but I'm not really worried about this tanking Phillies season or anything. To me, safety is more of a question than a weakness. After watching Reed Blankenship, I feel really confident that he can hold down one of the safety spots and play at a high level. He was a UDFA last year, but he started 5 seasons at MTSU, and it shows when you look at his ability to diagnose route combinations and be in the right spot. He only played 350 snaps last year, but he led all safeties in run stop rate and forced incompletion rate. He ranked top 30 in pretty much everything, and most of these stats are including him giving up a deep touchdown to CeeDee Lamb that wasn't even his fault. So I feel good about Blankenship. And then the projected safety 2 is Terrell Edmonds, former 1st round pick with elite speed, and I'm really interested to see how he fits into Sean Desai's defense. In Pittsburgh, he played mostly in the box. They play a more traditional free safety, strong safety defensive scheme, and I like the idea of Edmonds playing the star position where he's kind of a hybrid safety outside linebacker, but he does struggle reading routes and identifying his assignment. There were a lot of times he just wouldn't pick up a switch release and he'd let a receiver run wide open across the middle of the field. So he's a player that I think is going to be very dependent on usage. And then the rookie Sidney Brown out of Illinois has a lot of potential. His college tape was very up and down. He makes a ton of plays on the ball, but he did get beat pretty frequently, and he's an out-of-control tackler at times. So opposite of Blankenship, you've got 2 interesting options, but I'm not that confident in either of them for next year. Easy pick for the breakout player. I'm going with nose tackle Jordan Davis, and the limiting factor for him is just going to be availability. He has a career high of 378 snaps played in a season. He played 270 snaps as a rookie, and he was really good when he was on the field. He's basically unmovable as a run defender, and he isn't this technically polished pass rusher, but his size and athleticism alone is enough to generate some pressure. So it's understandable he didn't get more playing time last year given how stacked this defensive line was, but in year 2 we need to see him on the field and at least close to a full-time role, and if he's able to play 30 to 40 snaps a game, I have really high expectations for Jordan Davis. Sticking with the D-line, the Eagles' most underrated player is Milton Williams. Super athletic 3 technique with rare explosiveness and flexibility. He was part of a crowded rotation last year, but he was great as a run run defender, and he didn't really put up impressive pass rushing numbers, but he flashed when he got the opportunity. So I think worst case scenario, let's say Fletcher Cox has a major drop off at 33 years old, or Jalen Carter has a slow start as a rookie. You've got a high quality 3-tech, 4-eye type of player that can step in and give this defensive front a high floor. And my prove it player is running back DeAndre Swift, who the Eagles added in a trade with Detroit. I'm probably a little higher on Swift than most, and I really like him in a running back committee. I agree that he doesn't have great vision, he's too eager to bend runs outside, and he's dealt with injuries for most of his career, but he's so dynamic in the open field. Even if he is kind of a freestyler, he gives you so much potential for explosive plays, and I really like him as a receiving threat, except for the fact that he drops about 4 to 5 passes every year. So this is probably his last chance to show that he can be a full-time back, but I do expect him to be a playmaker in this offense. It might just be that all of his big plays come in like 4 games, which has kind of been his MO. If you're enjoying the video, make sure to subscribe and leave a like, and also follow us on all of our social medias. The links to those are in the description. My second ranked team in the NFC East is the Dallas Cowboys. I've got them 7th overall, and you look at the bars, it's a whole lot of green, probably the most solid roster in the NFL as far as not really having any weaknesses, and the definitive strength of this team is edge rusher. Micah Parsons' career is, I think, on an Aaron Donald level trajectory. 176 pressures and 29 sacks in his first 2 years on the edge is just unheard of. He has a lethal inside club move. His ability to threaten the outside and then change directions and cross over is so difficult to stop, and I'm excited to see how he develops his pass rushing moveset over the next few years, because he's been one of the most efficient pass rushers in the NFL with a relatively limited number of moves, but there's room for improvement when it comes to speed to power and tightening up his hand placement. So as good as he's been, I don't think we're at the ceiling yet. And then DeMarcus Lawrence is a great number 2. He would be most teams' number 1, right up there with Aaron Donald for the best cross chop in the NFL, and definitely the most aesthetically pleasing cross chop. You can see he got Evan Neal for 3 sacks with the exact same move. He is 31, so you never know when age regression is going to hit, but Dallas can go 6 or 7 deep at edge, so they're going to be rotating these guys in and out, and when they do need someone to step up as the full-time second edge rusher, they have plenty of options to choose from. Sam Williams would probably be my breakout player if I thought he was going to get more snaps. I'd guess he's the current plan as the long-term replacement for Lawrence, but pretty much everyone they played on the edge last year was productive. Dorrance Armstrong had the best season of his career with 43 pressures and 9 sacks. Dante Fowler had a resurgence with 40 and 6. He was playing out of his mind last year. Maybe you see some regression from those two, but they're still solid players as your 4th and 5th edge. And then they added a couple players in the draft that have some nice potential. Valami Fehoko had a ton of production at San Jose State. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up moving inside. He's big and powerful, and he's really good with his hands, but he's probably going to have a difficult time winning to the outside. He doesn't have much bend to flatten his angle as a speed rusher, but if he can add some weight and play as a base defensive end, I could see him having success, especially with how often Dallas uses stunts. And I also like Tyrus Wheat as a UDFA. You watch his college tape and he isn't a consistent high impact player, but there's some really high end flashes, so probably a long shot, but I do think there's something to work with there. And like I said, I don't think this team has any true weaknesses. I have linebacker as their lowest rated position group, but I'm actually optimistic for the future there, and I think they have a good chance to exceed that rating, so I went with offensive depth as their biggest weakness. Now, there aren't many teams that have true depth at offensive line, but if one of their starters gets injured, which isn't unheard of for Tyron Smith, it could get ugly. Matt Waletzko is purely an athletic project at this point. He's got a nice looking RAS card, but he played 1 snap as a rookie, so I have no idea what to expect there. Josh Ball and Matt Forniak haven't really shown much in their careers, and honestly, the rookie Asim Richards might be the backup I feel the best about plugging in if someone goes down. He has a lot of upside as a pass blocker, but he's still a 5th round rookie. At receiver, the top 3 is really exciting. CeeDee Lamb was so good last year, definitely a breakout season for him, and the addition of Brandon Cooks allows Michael Gallup to be the wide receiver 3, which is a much better role for him. But again, outside of the starters, you're relying on guys that haven't really shown much in the NFL. Between Simi Fehoko, Jalen Tolbert, and Kavonte Turpin, you've got 7 receptions for 53 yards total for their careers. Obviously, you're hoping Turpin adds most of his value as a returner, but you really need a second-year jump from Tolbert for there to be any depth. Like every team in this division, they do have a lot of good tight ends, so that's a plus, but overall this isn't an offense that's going to be able to sustain many injuries. My biggest question for this team is offensive coordinator. They moved on from Kellen Moore, which isn't a move I would have made, but I get it. There were clearly philosophical differences, and the offense was really good overall, but the game-to-game consistency wasn't there. And they replaced him with Brian Schottenheimer, kind of an uninspiring hire, but most people thought that about Dan Quinn, so we'll see how that goes. It looks like Mike McCarthy is still going to be the play caller, so we don't know exactly how much carryover there's going to be and how much schematic influence Schottenheimer is going to have. I'm not really as low on McCarthy as a lot of people seem to be, but offensive coaching is the main area of uncertainty for this team. Dallas has several players that I would consider breakout candidates. I mentioned Sam Williams, but I was really impressed by Osa Odighizuwa's second year, and I think his stock is on the rise. I could see Tyler Smith being a top 10 guard this season, but I went with Damone Clark, who I had a late second round grade on until the injury concerns popped up. He was expected to miss most, if not all, of his rookie year because of spinal fusion surgery, but he came back in week 8 and hit the ground running. He has prototypical size, speed, length for a Mike linebacker. He had some early struggles with play recognition. He was getting moved out of position by motion and play action, but as the season went on, you saw real-time improvement in his processing speed, and once he gets to the point where he's seeing the game clearly and he can keep his eyes up and play full speed, I think his stack and shed ability is going to shine through, and I can see him developing into a complete do-it-all 3-down linebacker. And the most underrated player on the Cowboys is Donovan Wilson. He's a really impactful run defender, and he's the type of high-energy player that you'd think every coach would want on their team, but somehow the Cowboys were able to bring him back for 3 years, $21 million, which has to be one of the best value non-rookie contracts in the league. I have the Giants 3rd in this division and 16th overall, and the strength of this team is the defensive line, which I have ranked 3rd in the NFL. What Dexter Lawrence gives you as a nose tackle that can actually pressure the quarterback is so valuable. This stat has been thrown around a lot, but he had the most pressures from a nose tackle alignment since 2018, which is the earliest year they have charted, and he pretty much does everything at a high level. As a run defender, he destroys reach blocks. He's one of the best 2-gap defensive tackles in the league. He puts on a weekly clinic on stacking, reading the play, disengaging, and making the stop. And in year 4, he really became a complete pass rusher. He's got a dominant bull rush, and then he counters off of that with probably the best rip move in the NFL, at least for defensive tackles. And then Leonard Williams and A'Shawn Robinson is a really solid 2 and 3. I think wide receiver is the Giants' biggest weakness. Joe Shane was pretty much starting from square one trying to rebuild this group. They've made a lot of investments, most of those being slot receivers, and I like a lot of these players as a 3rd option, but they don't have a true number 1, and I even think it's a stretch to call any of them a wide receiver 2. But the wild card is Jalen Hyatt. A lot was made about how he didn't face press in college. I think he had 1 reception and like 30-something routes against press last year, but if you actually go find those press coverage reps, he has some quickness at the line of scrimmage and he flashed some good hand usage. It's still a complete unknown, which for the purposes of a draft evaluation is kind of a negative, but it's not a confirmed weakness where you can only play in the slot. So I like the upside with Jalen Hyatt, but I think there will be an adjustment period early on. My biggest question is how Kayvon Thibodeau and Azeez Ojulari develop heading into year 2 and year 3. This has the potential to be a dynamic edge duo, but you need both of them to take a step forward. Thibodeau had a successful rookie season, but just like with most rookies, it was a lot more highlight plays than consistently winning and creating pressure. If he improves his hand placement and timing, I think he can be a top-tier edge rusher. He already made significant strides with his technique from college to his rookie year. Really, the only thing limiting his ceiling is some stiffness at the top of the rush. He kind of has to lay it all out to bend to the quarterback, but I think what he showed as a rookie is very encouraging. And then Azeez Ojulari is an interesting player. He had 16 sacks over his first 2 years, which is pretty solid for a second-round pick, especially when you consider he missed 11 games last year with an injury, but there were a good amount of sacks that were unblocked or late in the play coverage sacks, and I don't think that's really indicative of how often he's winning. But watching the games where Ojulari and Thibodeau were both on, it's easy to see this duo being a handful for opposing offenses. Ojulari is really effective using that ghost move where he flashes the hands and dips underneath, and as an undersized edge player, he's shown the ability to win with power, so there's a lot to build on with both of these players, but we need to see that consistent game-to-game production. I went back and forth on the breakout player, but I'm going to go with tight end Daniel Bellinger. He was a 4th-round pick out of San Diego State heading into his second year, and I was really impressed with what he showed as a rookie. Even with Darren Waller, who's closer to a receiver, I think Bellinger's still going to get plenty of opportunities as the Y. He was one of the better run-blocking tight ends last year, and it was every kind of run block. They'd use him as a lead blocker. He can slice across the formation on split zone, and even on down blocks, he can generate displacement on defensive ends. So I don't think he's going to put up crazy receiving numbers numbers, but as far as just being a valuable player, I'm expecting big things from Daniel Bellinger. I've got Adoree Jackson as the most underrated player. He's only going to give you 12 games a year most likely, but when he's on the field, he's a really good cornerback. He has elite speed, really fluid in man coverage, and he's one of the better off corners in the league. He has that ability to break out of his pedal quickly and make plays on the ball. And my prove it player is right tackle Evan Neal. He had a very disappointing rookie year for the 7th overall pick, 52 pressures and 8 sacks allowed. I would estimate 80 to 85% of his losses last season were to the outside. Whenever he'd punch, he would stop sliding his feet, and edge rushers were able to just rip through the outside shoulder with no resistance. I mentioned DeMarcus Lawrence getting him with the cross chop a few times, but that wasn't an anomaly. So you're hoping he has an Andrew Thomas career arc. Obviously, you shouldn't be giving up on anyone after a bad rookie season, but he still needs to take a major step forward this year. And finally, we've got the Washington Commanders, who are my 27th ranked team in the NFL, and this is the best defensive line in the league. Jonathan Allen has such a unique pass rushing style. If I did like top 5 pass rush wins of last season, he's got 2 that immediately come to mind. He has overwhelming power, but he can also win with his hands, and he's masterful setting up his counters. And then Daron Payne has historically been more of a nose tackle that can play different spots. Last year, they gave pretty much all of his nose tackle snaps to John Ridgeway, and I think that was a big reason he doubled his previous career high in sacks last season. But I don't think of that as a breakout year for Daron Payne. I thought he broke out in 2021. He only had 5 sacks, but that's when I started to really notice Payne winning consistently as a pass rusher. And then the other player to mention is Fedarian Mathis, who I was shocked to see go in the 2nd round, but he is kind of a high floor, low ceiling nose tackle with really good hand placement, and you want to see him win that 3rd spot. He's probably not going to be a playmaker, but he can hold his ground and be a solid run defender. But the biggest weakness is the other side of the line of scrimmage. Left to right, you've got Charles Leno, Chris Paul, Nick Gates, Sam Cosmi, and Andrew Wiley. And Cosmi's the only projected starter on the O-line that I consider to be above average. When I think of replacement level starters, Andrew Wiley is one of the first players that comes to mind. He's not going to ruin your offense, but he'll get beat a couple times per game, and you kind of have to live with that. Charles Leno has been kind of in that tier for most of his time in the league. I've actually been really impressed with how he's played over the last couple years. He's had a hell of a career for a 7th round pick, and he's gotten better with age. He pretty much shut down Micah Parsons on an island in week 4, but he isn't a great athlete, so when he loses, it looks really bad. Chris Paul has a lot of upside as a 2nd-year player out of Tulsa, but he barely played as a rookie, and his college tape was pretty wild from a technique standpoint. Nick Gates is coming over from New York. His tape wasn't actually that bad last year. I didn't notice him getting beat very often going through the Giants tape, but he just hasn't played that much in the last couple seasons, so I don't have a very firm evaluation on him. And then Sam Cosmi, they're moving over to guard. He's actually going to be my breakout pick for the Commanders. He's 6'6" with off the charts athleticism, 9.99 RAS score. He can drive people back in the run game, and he has the movement skills to block any concept. I've seen a lot of people say that arm length was the reason he's moving inside, and he doesn't have great length for a tackle, but I didn't see that as his biggest issue. To me, it was more about balance. As a taller offensive lineman, it's a lot more difficult to stay upright, and you saw that a lot with Cosmi. When he'd get into a deep pass set and the rusher countered inside, he really struggles to recover and stay on his feet. But as far as length, you can get by with 33-inch arms if you have good hand placement, which I think Sam Cosmi does. He also gave up a lot of quote-unquote pressures that weren't really his fault. Every pressure and sack isn't created equally. There were a lot of times Carson Wentz would just get so much depth in the pocket, and there's nothing Sam Cosmi could really do about that. So I'm optimistic for Cosmi. I think he's almost there. It's just a little rough around the edges at this point. And circling back to the offensive line as a whole, I think the best path for this to be a top 20 unit is one or both of Braden Daniels and Ricky Stromberg winning the starting job. I'm not sure what position Daniels is going to play. I really like him as a guard, but not so much on the outside. But I think those two have a lot more upside than who they have currently listed. The biggest question for this team is obviously Sam Howell. I was a big fan of Howell as a prospect. I had him right behind Kenny Pickett as quarterback 2. I'm not sure why he fell to the 5th round, but I didn't really see a major gap between him and Desmond Ridder or Malik Willis. I viewed Sam Howell as kind of an early career Jalen Hurts type of player, really accurate throwing outside the numbers, not a game-breaking athlete, but he's faster than most quarterbacks, and he's a really tough runner to pick up extra yards. And he also seems to have the demeanor and poise you want from your starting quarterback. He got his only start in week 18, and I don't want to overanalyze one game, but there was a lot to be encouraged by. He made a few really nice deep passes down the sideline. He was converting 3rd downs with his legs, and he can get the ball out quickly over the middle of the field on RPOs. The main thing that's still a concern is holding onto the ball and taking too many sacks, and he's still a prospect at this point. He played in one of those those college-y bubble screen offenses at UNC. So whether or not he can read the middle of the field as a shorter quarterback that's probably going to be under a lot of pressure, I don't know what to expect. So I think Hal has legitimate starter upside, but I can't give him too high of a rating at this point because there isn't a whole lot of tape to evaluate. The Commanders' most underrated player is safety Derek Forrest. Washington has a really nice safety duo with Forrest and Cam Curl, but Forrest is definitely the player with the most upside. He has sideline to sideline range, he's composed at the catch point and makes a lot of plays on the ball, and he probably had the hardest hit of 2022 on Travis Etienne, so he's one of the most entertaining players to watch, and ideally they could keep both of their safeties, but if it comes down to it, I would prioritize extending Derek Forrest. And then easy choice with Chase Young as the prove-it player. He's struggled with injuries over the last couple seasons and just 73 pressures and 8 sacks for his career, so step one is being on the field, but I also think he still has a ways to go with his pass rushing skill set. He's really big and really athletic, so he's one of the few players that can just show up and make an impact by running through people, but he needs to develop more of a pass rushing plan to live up to his potential. Even if he doesn't put it together this year, I think he'll be a player that continues to get chances because of his natural talent and where he was picked, but in terms of his future in Washington, this is the year for him to show what he can do. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy the video, make sure to like and subscribe. Also, let me know in the comments any NFL players or teams that you'd like me to cover.